meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Well, I am very, very excited to have Ryan MacDonald on the podcast today. We've already, before recording, had some good conversation, so I cannot wait to bring you all into this. I'm going to introduce you a little bit to Ryan real quickly. Ryan is a follower of Jesus. He's a husband, an adoptive foster, and biological dad. He is a pastor and the regional director of an awesome organization that I love very much, Foster the City, over Los Angeles and Orange County in California. In fact, Ryan, I should have worn my Foster the City t-shirt today. I just don't know what I was thinking.
That was a big miss.
That was a big miss.
I also didn't wear my Foster the City t-shirt, so I think we'll just call it like a casual Wednesday.
That's right. I also know about you that you love theology, basketball, playing with your kids. This is not in the order, not in the priority order here. Spending time with your wife and good coffee.
Yes.
Ryan, are you a coffee snob?
I am a coffee snob, but there's a place in my heart for diner coffee for the right setting. So I'm not pretentious, I hope, and I'm happy to drink whatever coffee you serve. But yes, I do like good coffee.
I like good coffee too. I do. Well, I am excited to get started. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, let's kind of step into your whole, how you even got involved in foster care, because clearly you are involved now at a variety of levels, right?
Yeah.
With work, with family. How did that start? Just kind of walk us through your journey into foster parenting.
Yeah, well, I was dragged into foster care. I like to say my wife was pulling one arm and the Lord was pulling the other arm. And I've been reflecting on it a little bit recently. And I think I can trace it back to a class I took in college. I grew up in a very small, rural, kind of middle class setting, and I was removed from more of the immediate poverty and hardship that we see in some of our urban settings. And so I didn't really have a grid for people who were in need or under-resourced. Mm-hmm. I knew it happened, but it was a distant thing, not a personal thing. And then I took this class called Money, Sex, and Power that just walked through how those three things are abused in our society and how, as followers of Jesus, we can engage them. And it was just completely eye-opening to me to see that there was an entire group of people that were under-resourced and underserved in our society and kind of forgotten about, so to speak. And so that really planted a seed. Fast forwarding about a year after I graduated Bible college, my pastor asked me to preach my first sermon on Sunday morning. So I was so excited and I was ready for the topic. And he said, I want you to preach on adoption, and I want you to kind of launch our church into a season of engaging vulnerable children. And so I felt pressure throughout sermon prep, but also God just really met me during that time. I think particularly I was struck by Adopted for Life by Russell Moore. There's a section in that book where he talks about the silent orphanage. And as I read through that portion, how children stop crying at a certain point because their needs were no longer met. It was like a dagger through my heart. And I remember tearing up during sermon prep. And that was the first moment that God began to open my eyes and really soften my heart for kids who needed someone to respond to their cries. Kind of a fun fact is I wasn't dating my now wife at the time, but as I preached that sermon at our church, that's what put me on her radar as someone who was kind of eligible to be a future spouse because I had this heart for adoption. So in all the ways, God absolutely just pulled me into this story of caring for vulnerable kids through that assignment to preach, and then through my wife, who's had a passion since she was in middle school to adopt and to care for kids. I think as we got married, she was a transitional life coach for kids who are aging out of the system for about 4 years. And really, as she just read through the case notes of the type of abuse and neglect that these kids have gone through, she would carry those things home and at times just fall into my arms weeping, trying to hold just the pain of the abuse that these kids have gone through. And that, watching how that affected my wife, really then kind of sparked a call for us to engage more in foster care. But I was still so apprehensive. Like, I did not want to do this. I did not understand it. We didn't have any biological kids at the time. I didn't understand that you could care for a kid who would just leave. But my wife kept in touch with two of her former clients. And one of them just had a horrific story. When they were 14, their whole family was killed, and they were the only ones who survived this just horrific incident. And we were able to be placed with him through Safe Families, which is kind of temporary hosting, while other programs were being set up. And he would play video games all the time, like these crazy intense fantasy video games. And I remember one day, I know exactly what road, exactly what spot. He was talking about how much he loved these video games. And I just asked him, how come you love video games so much? And he just said, well, when I'm in the world of fantasy, nobody can hurt me. And that line has just haunted me, particularly the fact that this young boy at 14 years old had to enter foster care and never found a permanent home. I think that did something to my heart. There was an injustice there. There was almost an anger there about why this 14-year-old boy who just went through the most horrific thing you can imagine never found a home. And I think by God's grace, it was this righteous anger that kind of pushed me over the edge to go back to my wife and say, okay, like, let's become foster parents.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did that conversation go?
Well, the initial conversations of Stacy trying to get me to do foster care, I was just guarded and confused. It also helped that I went to Empowered to Connect, now called Hope for the Journey conference. And that really gave me a framework for how to be a parent, and that I wasn't going to have to just make this up as I went along, because I had never been a parent. But there was a methodology that I could use to love kids and to care for them. That really helped me catch a vision for being a dad of children experiencing foster care. And we actually filled out our application a few minutes before midnight in 2015. And we joked that the county thought like we were just drunk and filling this application outline. Like, what do you want to do next year? I don't know. Let's get some kids. And so they actually didn't get back to us for a while. And we were like, oh man, do we have to resubmit it? Was this like just midnight intoxication nonsense? But thankfully they took us seriously, and they did eventually call us back for training. So.
Wow. So when you first entered care, or when you first entered foster parenting, how, like, age of child, like, when did you get this first call?
Yeah, our first call.
It's always such a big thing to think about, right? That first call.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Our first, we also did here in Orange County, we have something called ESH, Emergency Shelter Homes. So it's like kind of short-term placements. So we signed up for that as well. So we've actually had 9 different kids that we've got to care for the last 6 years. But some of those were pretty brief because they were a stopgap till social workers could identify a family. So our first placement was that. It was August 2017. And we were placed with this beautiful baby boy who was a newborn. And my wife was just elated to be able to hold this little guy. And thankfully, his grandmother stepped forward, and he was only with us a few weeks. And I was actually on a missions trip for half of it. So that placement.
You planned that
yeah,
well, Ryan.
I did, yeah. Thankfully, her mom flew down and stayed with her for that week. But it was terrible timing, just kind of that ministry and foster care, life and tension. But yeah, it was a significant placement. I think about him often, and he, in some sense, made me a dad for the first time. And isn't that the weird, complex thing about foster care? I don't know where he is or how he's doing. I was only able to care for him literally for a week, but he was such a gift to me because he introduced me into fatherhood. So I really hope in God's providence I get to meet him one day. I think that'd be very significant. So,
wow. That's very, very cool. This makes me think of a story. It's not fully related, but when we adopted our son Hudson from Guatemala in international adoption, you get a referral of a child. I mean, it's similar in foster care. You might hear about a child and stuff, and you can choose like, yes, I feel like we can take this child, or no. We got a referral before Hudson, and it was the very first referral we had ever gotten. And I remember thinking, once I get that call, we're for sure going to say yes, of course. Why would we not?
Yeah.
And we got this referral for a 6-month-old little guy. And I felt such turmoil, lack of peace. Like I didn't know, it did not feel right. And yet I felt like so wrong that I would, and we just struggled. I just remember crying and just not knowing what to do, but also just not feeling at all peaceful. Yeah. And my husband was like, because, you have to make these decisions quickly.
Huge decisions.
He's like, huge. And this is adoption. This is forever. And he's like, let's go to sleep and let's wake up and we will pray. God, when we wake up, please wake us up with peace. Or keep this turmoil, and if we feel turmoil, we will trust this and know.
Yeah.
And we woke up, same, just turmoil, and so we said no.
Yep.
I felt so much guilt.
Yeah.
The next day, we get another call about our son, Hudson, and this time everything felt different. It was like everything felt peaceful. And we said yes to him. But the point of the story that I want to tell you is fast forward 10 months to when we're picking up Hudson to bring him home from Guatemala. I'm walking through the Marriott in Guatemala City. I see a little boy, probably about 6 months older than Hudson. And one of the things he had was a gray patch of hair. Just part of his hair was like gray. And I see a little boy and I'm like, that's the same kid.
What?
That is the same kid. I know it is. And I asked about him, and he was being adopted by our agency representative. And it was the same kid.
Wow.
And he was good.
Yeah.
And he was with his mom.
Yeah.
And he was where he was supposed to be. And all I said was like, Lord, you did not have to show me that. You did not have to do that. Yeah. But you did that as a gift to just say, you don't need to feel guilty.
Yes.
I had a plan all along, and it's what it is. And so I'm just thinking, I would not be surprised if God brings him into your life in some way or another. He has this way of doing this really, really cool stuff.
And that's so beautiful.
Isn't that crazy?
That is insane. Like the odds of that happening are so small, and that's why they're not odds. And that's why in this journey of caring for kids, we don't do it alone. We do it with God. The Spirit is leading us. The Spirit is giving us peace. The Spirit is protecting us from placements that would not be a good fit for our family, and reminding us that we're not the main character in the story. He is the main character. He is the one who protects and defends and cares for vulnerable children, moving us like chess pieces. John Wimber, a well-known pastor here in Orange County, used to say, I'm change in God's pocket. He can spend me how he wants. And isn't that the case for us? We don't know how long we're going to be placed with a kid. We don't know if they're going to reunify, if they're going to adopt, if they're going to go to a family member. All we can do is be faithful for the time that God calls us to act. And when we're done acting in obedience to his call, we rest in the promises of Christ, knowing that we have been obedient because he has empowered us to do so. And without that, I could not be a foster parent.
No, it is absolutely too hard.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Man, I love that. It is. It's just when you look back at the things God has done and all these different moments, and you're like, sometimes we joke around here at TFI. I just said it to my one of my teammates today. Man, it almost seems like God is in control.
Who's driving this ship? Oh yeah, it's the Lord.
Right.
We'll be fine.
Yeah. It's almost as if he knew and knows what to do. And it's just,
Amen.
it's really, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
It sounds like a sermon in the works for you. I would encourage you to keep developing it.
Okay. Let's talk about the other kids that have come into your home and kind of give a brief overview of ages, kind of how that has looked for you.
Yes. So like I said, we've actually had 10 placements. We had one placement returned to us after reunification and then reunified again a second time. But 9 kids total. The shortest of that was, I think about 5 days. And the longest of which was around 15 months at one time.
Okay.
And then we were able to adopt one child who needed a forever home. And that's my oldest daughter, Nora Grace. And she's 5, soon to be 6, going on 17. And so, it's been a real wide range of experience in terms of the cases. Some of them we knew right up front, reunification's in picture, it's likely. Some of them we knew, hey, there's a relative, we're just waiting for them to be cleared. Expectations have been such an important part of this process and setting appropriate expectations. There's a social worker in our church who's also a foster parent. And he said he took on the framework of like a grandparent. And I thought that was really helpful. He said, we are the primary caregiver and we love to the full, but like a grandparent, you don't know if your grandkids are going to be around, if they're going to move on. And so that framework at times has been really helpful. I get to unconditionally love and care and guide with no expectation or promise that this child will remain in my life.
Yes.
I think one thing that is just still I reflect back on as one of the most significant and greatest days of my life is at one point we were fostering 2 separate kids for 2 separate cases. So they're unrelated. And the judge declared for the one child, Nora Grace, that she was going to be adopted. And so she, they set a date, the court system did. But at the same exact time, our foster son, who we had had for quite some time, his case plan was reunification, and he was being reunified on the same exact day. So on February 1st, 2019, we both packed up all my foster son's stuff to reunify him with his mom. And we were making preparations for a party and a celebration to permanently set my daughter in our family. It was a very emotionally intense time. But in preparing for the adoption party, my wife kind of had this idea, this question that I think was from God floated in her mind. Who is going to celebrate our foster son's mom? On February 2nd, after the court hearing, we were throwing a big party, 120 of our friends from church in the lobby. It was an absolute blowout, bounce houses, great food. It was amazing. And this question kind of nagged my wife, like, who's going to celebrate all of the hard work that my son's mom has done to reunify? And so she approached me and she said, what if we made it a joint adoption reunification party? And so we actually invited our foster son and his mom and their family. And so we made it a joint party. It was a celebration of Nora being set in our family and our son going home. And at the end of the time, we brought her up and we just spent about 5-10 minutes just honoring her, the things that Christians do, just encouraging and saying how proud we are of her. And without any prompting, my entire community of 120 people stood up and gave her a standing ovation. And this woman just fell to the ground in tears because she was so overwhelmed by the affirmation that she was good, that she had done well, that we were proud of her. And I honestly think that's one of the closest moments I've ever been to heaven. The veil between how things should be and how things are was so thin in that moment. And here is this woman who in the eyes of the world is wrong. She's bad, but in God's kingdom, she's good and she's loved and she's beautiful. And I can still hear that applause ringing over her. And afterwards, she just had such wonderful things to say about how much honor and love she felt from being around us. And I think that was the church at her best in that moment. Nobody told them. We didn't walk around and say, hey guys, we're going to honor our son's mom. At the end of it, can you stand up? It'd be great if we all clapped. It just happened because the Spirit of God was affirming the good work that was being done in our community. And I will treasure that moment for the rest of my life.
That's incredible. That's incredible. That is absolutely the church at her best. I love how you said that.
Yeah.
Wow. And she'll never forget that either.
No. Yeah.
Let's talk more about the church engaging in foster care, because this is we believe so deeply that this is something the church needs to be about, because the church has the hope, right? We're the ones who know how to point to Jesus. We are not the hope, but Jesus is the hope. We know how to point to the hope. So why does the church need to be involved when you're talking to people? I mean, how do you share? How do you help others become aware?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. One that I'm still mining the depths of. But my role at Foster the City is to empower the churches that we have the privilege of serving to be more effective at casting vision, particularly to help people prayerfully consider becoming foster parents themselves. But then to wrap every foster parent with a team of support friends. So at least 4 households who commit to the duration of the placement to love the family and the child together. And so we have just created the system and the vision for that. And then we get to hand that off to the churches who actually do the good work of producing fruit and loving each other. And so along the way, most simply put is that the Bible focuses on vulnerable kids, and it is part of our inheritance and our calling to care for them. One of my favorite Old Testament scholars, Walter Brueggemann, wrote this tiny little article tucked away in this dissertation, and I read it a while ago, and it was the best thing I've ever read on the topic. And he said there is no greater ethical commandment in the Old Testament than for God's people to care for orphans. And he just begins to unpack how we should be raising and nurturing our kids to be people of compassion. And he just completely obliterated the wall between raising my biological kids and caring for vulnerable kids. We raise our biological kids to be people of compassion and people who see those on the margins. And then we model that ourselves by making our homes, in whatever way God calls us, safe places for those who need respite. And it's all kind of rolled into child rearing, that one isn't over against the other, that as we raise biological kids or as we welcome kids from vulnerable places, that we're discipling them to the same aim, to be people of compassion, to share the love of God with others. And I love that framework. And in my time just working with pastors, I think it's been helpful in terms of sharing the vision to get a greater library of how often the Bible talks about vulnerable children. You know, we only have that one verse in the New Testament that's quoted ad nauseum within our community in James 1:27. But there are 42 verses in the Old Testament about yatom, the Hebrew word for the fatherless or orphan. And even the word yatom, the root in the Hebrew means to be lonely. That's what the root of the word means, to be lonely. So intrinsic in Hebrew wisdom, and this idea is that if you don't have the security of a consistent caregiver, you are going to be lonely. And that just colors, I think, our whole engagement with vulnerable children is we're not just fixing their problems, we are to be present with them, that their deepest need is a loneliness and an isolation. And we see that in our teens who have been adopted and they're around their peers and they feel like they don't fit in. We see that in young kids who still cry out for their biological mom, even though parental rights are terminated and even though they have a new forever mommy. There is a loneliness that marks those who have not had consistent caregivers. And 42 times in the Old Testament, God is repeating over and over, don't forget about these kids. Don't forget about these kids. Don't forget about these kids, because we're a forgetful people. And so I think it has to start in Scripture. We have to go to the book that shows us the beauty of Christ, but shows us how to live into the beauty of Christ. And the more we understand and the more we deal with those texts that specifically tell us how to engage kids who need caregivers, the more passion we're going to have. And we're going to do that in God's way instead of our way.
Right. Because one, our way, we are going to mess it up.
Yes, totally.
But if we do it in God's way, we're still going to mess it up a little bit. But he's going to, he's going to be, he is so faithful.
And
despite us.
And God's way includes repentance. And so that means I don't have to be perfect.
That's exactly
I don't have
right.
to be a perfect father.
Exactly
I couldn't be a perfect father. I make mistakes all the time with my kids. Both those I'm temporarily caring for and permanently, but repentance is a part of the economy of God's community.
Yes.
And so I am invited to repent of my mistakes, and I am forgiven, and his mercies are new every morning. And no matter how bad of a parenting day I have, I can come to Christ and find freedom and atonement and forgiveness for my mistakes. And I am made right, and I am set before the presence of God again. And I am filled with vision to go back into parenting without the shame that wants to so easily cling to us.
I want to add to what you're saying about that word yatom also, because I don't know if it is only meant for kids, or if it's more about the loneliness, because I think that for sure, like what we see at TFI is a lot of agency workers are
absolutely.
Incredibly lonely.
Yes.
A lot of foster parents are like, no one gets this. I mean, I remember feeling that way when I was a foster mom. I was a biological mom also, an adoptive mom also. And as a foster parent, I felt the most misunderstood and the most lonely. And so I just think about, and our parents, our vulnerable parents, right? Like, who are so lonely. I remember our kids' birth mom. She had another baby, and we had a relationship. So she invited me to come to the birth. And I was the only one there with her. I remember when she was getting into the car and she was having contractions, and we got her to the hospital. And I remember helping her get her pain under control. And finally, after her pain kind of got under control, I remember being hungry. And I thought, I am not going to eat in front of her, because I remember when my husband ate in front of me when I was in labor. And it wasn't a good thing. I was frustrated with him. And so, but I remember walking out the door and saying, hey, I'll come I'll be back. I'm going to go down and get some food. And she just stopped me at the door and said, Jamie, can you come right back up? Can you come right back up? And I just thought, just my presence. I wasn't giving any big words. I wasn't, but I was there. I was wiping her forehead.
Yes.
I cut the cord of this baby. I held this baby right after he was born and sang it and prayed over him. I mean, it was such a humbling experience, but I just will never forget her just stopping me. Please come right back. Like, I need you. I need to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, our agency workers, our social workers, and here in LA County, the turnover is just so large, and the volume of kids in care, fluctuates between 28,000 children and 33,000 children in one county. That's more kids in care than any entire state, and so you just imagine the hopelessness. One psychologist who works for the county, I was talking to about a year ago. And he said to be sent into foster care in LA County is a death sentence. just because of how broken the system is and just the volume of suffering. And so we absolutely have to be affirming, caring for our social workers. Yeah, if you're a pastor listening, put together a group that specifically ministers to those in the helping profession at your church. Invite them to a nice dinner, listen to them, pray for them regularly. Like, they're on the front lines of kingdom work, and it's often not recognized as such. And so it is just an area where we need hope. We need hope.
Yeah. Yes. And it's often similar to birth families. Agency workers are often thought of as the bad guy.
Oh, absolutely. Working for the man, taking kids away.
Right.
Just so backwards.
Exactly. You've said God is calling all of us to take the next right step towards those who are hurting. And I really love that, because we are all called to something. God has a purpose for your life and the people you're going to impact and who are going to impact you.
Yep.
And same with me, right? So it isn't that everyone has to do the same thing. I mean, I know this is a statement that is made over and over, but it's one to be made over and over, because this is not about an in the box thing. This is about us opening our eyes and our ears and our hands to Jesus and saying, okay, I see there's a need. I see that I'm called to engage. Where do I go?
Yes, absolutely. And there's one of the great theologians of the last century, B.B. Warfield, wrote this really famous essay on the emotional life of Jesus. And he did this thorough study, and he said the number one emotion that Jesus experienced was compassion. It was his driving emotion when he interacted with anyone. And so I think to take the right step is to cultivate compassion. And that could be your coworker who's having a hard day and they're tearing up and they need to leave the meeting, following her out and saying, hey, what's going on? This isn't just in the area of justice. We need to cultivate this thing. We need to be people of compassion wherever we are, with our family members, with people in our Bible studies, people at work, just taking the gap to see and to listen to those who are hurting and to move towards them. And over time, you become a person of compassion. And so when you hear about a child who needs a home or a social worker who's on the verge of quitting, you have a knee-jerk reaction to move towards them and support. And so I think every day we have an opportunity to say yes to God and to move towards people, or to ignore the pain that's around us. And the more we ignore the pain, the more numb to the pain we become, unfortunately. And so it's so important to take those little steps of compassion in our day-to-day life, because over time, they will really result in some significant change.
Yes. And ensuring that we are moving towards people in compassion out of love and out of the Spirit, right?
Yeah.
Not out of obligation as well, because that can lead also to compassion fatigue or burnout.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
I couldn't agree with that more. Stacy and I have only been able to care for 10 different placements over 6 years because we Sabbath every Friday. Every Friday, we practice Sabbath. We don't do anything. We don't do chores. We eat the food we want. We hang out. We have fun with our kids. We don't do any ministry commitments. That's the first thing that sustained us. The second thing is we take long gaps between longer placements. So we typically take between 3 to 6 months when a child moves on from our house that was with us for 3 months or longer, just to kind of reset, to check in, because we want to do this for the long haul. And that's really what we need. We need career foster families, because the burnout rate is so high, and you just skill up like anything else. It's a skill. And so we need not just a whole bunch of people that are new to this, which is a wonderful place to start. Not saying anything bad about that, but God needs to call a remnant of people. He is calling a remnant of career foster families who see this as part of what they've been put here to do, is to help kids return home or get to family members, or to be placed in their home if possible. So I think we have to rest We have to rest in this work or you will burn out. And resting is a declaration that God, you're the one who moves things forward. It's not me. I can remove myself from the story and the show will go on. And for Stacy and I to do that once a week and to do that in big gaps in transition of placements has really, I'd say, are the two primary reasons that 6 years in, we still have faith and vision for what God's calling us to do.
I love that. I think that it's an act of surrender and an act of trust.
Yes.
Like you said, to say, again, kind of back to what you said earlier, I'm not the hero of the story.
Yeah. I get to be a character. I'm an important character.
I get to be a character, absolutely.
In God's story of caring for these kids. What a great story to be a part of.
Yeah. It's so awesome.
Yes. Amen.
I just feel like the more that the older I get, the closer as I just draw closer and closer to Jesus, like I'm just reminded over and over, it is all about, well, one, of course it's all about him, but the best quote work that I do is being dependent and needy and just saying, Jesus, I need you. I need you. I need you. And today is yours. And I trust you more than I trust myself. And I don't need to know the next step because I trust that you're going to show me the next step. And it's such a freeing place to live. But it's still so easy to just take it all back and control, and think I do know,
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know if you struggle with control at all.
Not at all. Yeah. Yeah. I'm coming out with a book soon. 10 steps to free yourself from control. Complete sarcasm.
Fantastic.
It is hard. I mean, in parenting, oh my goodness, that's the name of the game, is surrendering control. Yesterday we went to like a splash pad near us and played, and one of my kids threw a huge tantrum in front of everyone, and all I want to do is pick him up and drag him to the car. But that's not a good long-term solution. Like, we needed to talk through it. I needed to hear her. I needed to listen. I hate doing that stuff. I don't want to do that. I just want to pick her up and put her in the car because she's throwing a fit. Every single day I'm faced with a decision to just assert my will or to listen and to check in with my surroundings to find the best way forward. Yes. I don't think it's ever going to fully go away, but by God's grace, it is getting a little bit better. So,
yeah. Amen. Well, and when you do experience surrender and trust, and then you see his faithfulness, it does make it a little bit easier, if that's the right word, but to go, he's done it before, he's going to do it again. And when I am not a nice person when I'm at control. We call it crazy mom. Crazy mom.
That. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Crazy mom is not a good mom.
No. Yeah. And I think too, we start to see the fruit of doing it God's way. Even my daughter, I've just seen such beautiful fruit, and how she's being formed because we're a foster care family. She's in on it. She gets to decide when we take another placement. She's absolutely a part of the story. The other day we were reading in her children's Bible this parable of the rich fool who didn't share anything with the poor. He dies, and then the poor pillage all his stuff. And my daughter shuts the Bible. She's 5 years old. She runs into her bedroom. She grabs her piggy bank. She dumps out her piggy bank on the floor, and she says, "Dad, I need to give this away. I don't want to be like the rich fool." And so part of me just wanted to be like, who are you going to give $11 to? Like, that's your money, put it back. But I just felt the Spirit say, like, let her give this money away. So I was like, okay, Nora. And so in that moment, we got in the car and we drove to a foster care agency down the street. And Nora by herself walked up to the front desk and said, I'd like to make a donation, and handed them $11. And I was just like, wow, like, she is soft to the things of God. And, constantly, she has a framework of what we have needs to be shared with other people. And I just love that. There was this lady who was walking her dog in front of our house when we first moved in to this 3-bedroom house we're renting. And she said, be careful, there's crime in this neighborhood. right in front of my daughter, who at the time I think was 3 or just recently 4. And I was like, oh no, like what are you referencing? And she's like, someone broke into this house your guys are moving into. I was like, oh man, like how long ago is that? She goes, oh, it was about 10 years ago. I was like, 10 years ago, huh? Thanks for the, the historic update from the archives here, lady, right in front of my 3-year-old daughter. So then we were picking up lunch and we sat at the picnic table, and Nora just goes, why did that lady say that? And I was like, I'm not sure. A lot of people just kind of live in fear. And she goes, God gave us this house and it is good. And we are going to use it to bless other people. And I was just wow, those little glimpses of doing it the right way, of surrendering of control, of following God's path. We don't get those all the time. I wish we had more of them, but when they come, we have to treasure them because they're affirmation that we're moving our family in the right direction.
Totally. And I will not name my child, but I have to throw them under the bus a little bit right now, because on the other side, I remember it was a couple of years ago and our little boys were doing a lemonade stand. And business was not good, and things were moving slow until they decided, let's give half to charity. Oh, wow. And they put out the sign, half to charity, and money started rolling in.
There you go.
I mean, really, like they made bank. But I just remember him coming to me after it was all done and going, so, do I really have to give half to charity? I'm like, did you tell people you would? Yeah, then yes.
Oh, man. It's just a slogan people say, right? It doesn't mean much.
Yeah, it's just a marketing scheme. Oh man, Ryan, I feel like we could talk for a long time. Is there anything on your heart as we close out here that you just want to kind of finish off with, whether it be to the interested foster parent or to the lonely worker or to the church at large, like whatever's on your heart? I just want to give you the final word here.
No pressure.
Make it good. Exactly.
We were doing, I was preaching at a church, casting vision for Foster the City, getting people engaged. And there's, a table afterwards. And this guy came up to me in tears. He was in his 60s. And he just immediately launched into this story where when he was a young boy, him and his family had fostered a few kids. And there was one kid in particular. He was in elementary school. I forget exactly how old, but it was just a really, really hard placement. And the family had managed to teach him, to memorize this verse in Romans. And one of the only memories he has of his foster sibling was skipping around the house, singing this, this memory verse out of the book of Romans. And then he transitioned out and they totally lost contact with him. They didn't hear from him again until when that young boy was in his 50s and he passed away. Somehow the people arranging for the services let the family know, hey, this boy you fostered has recently passed away. Would you like to come to the funeral? And so this man who, was the former foster sibling of this boy had passed away, went to the funeral, went to the graveside. And at this point, he's sharing this and just tears are just streaming down his face. And he just said, we thought we didn't help that boy at all. Like so many behaviors, he had to be replaced. It was a total failure. But we found out at the funeral that in adulthood, he found Jesus and he served the Lord. And as they looked on the tombstone, his epitaph was the Bible verse, the Bible memory verse that they had taught him as a little kid was literally on his tombstone. And that story has just been such a beautiful reminder of all the hard work you're doing, the kids on your caseload, the children you get to care for temporarily, the fundraising that you're grinding to get those dollars. Whatever it is, those little things, like you never know the life-shaping change that's going to come about when we are obedient to the work of God. And there are hidden things now that will be revealed in eternity of the fruit of your care. And so my encouragement to all of us who are in this space of child welfare is that we have a short time on this earth to care and serve those who are vulnerable. And we do it well. We don't exhaust ourselves. We don't grind ourselves to nothing. We do it in wisdom, but we do it well. And we have no idea the type of life-changing, life-shaping fruit that could come from teaching a little boy a Bible memory verse.
That's powerful. And I'm excited, Ryan. You're going to have to tell us when you get your story of meeting your foster baby.
Yes, absolutely. That would be wonderful.
Man, thank you so much. Seriously, this has been an absolute delight, and I appreciate the time you've given us today. And I love partnering in whatever way we can with Foster the City.
Yes.
Also.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.